Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comments section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Salvatore Lucania was born on November 24, 1897, in a small town called Lercara Fritti in Sicily, Italy. His father was Antonio Lucania, and his mother was Rosalia Caffarella. Salvatore was not the only child. He had two older brothers named Giuseppe and Bartolomeo. Later, he would also have two younger sisters named Filippa and Concetta. The family lived in a poor area, and Salvatore's father worked in a sulfur mine, which was dangerous and difficult work. Antonio Lucania wanted very much to leave Sicily and move to America. Every year, he would buy a calendar from a steamship company in the city of Palermo. He kept a jar under his bed and put money into it over time. This money was meant for boat tickets to the United States. Antonio was too proud to ask anyone for help, so his wife Rosalia would secretly accept money from a cousin named Rotolo, who also lived in their town. This extra money helped the family save enough for the trip. In 1906, when Salvatore was 8 years old, the family finally had enough money to travel. They sailed on a ship from Palermo to New York City. When they arrived, they settled in a neighborhood called the Lower East Side in Manhattan. This area was full of poor families who had just arrived from Italy and other countries. The streets were crowded, and many people lived in small apartments. As a boy, Salvatore had to grow up fast in this new place. He learned English and got used to life in America. When he was 14 years old, he decided to stop going to school. He found a job delivering hats and earned $7 every week. One day, he played a dice game with other boys and won $244. This was a lot of money at that time. After winning, Salvatore quit his hat delivery job and started making money in other ways on the street. That same year, his parents became worried about him. They sent him to a special school in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn Truancy School. This was a school for children who did not attend regular classes or who got into trouble. Salvatore did not stay there long. He went back to the streets and continued making his own way. As a teenager, Salvatore started his own small gang of boys. He also joined a well-known group called the 5 Points Gang. This gang was made up of young men who committed small crimes in the neighborhood. Salvatore offered protection to Jewish boys who lived nearby. For 10 cents each week, he would make sure that Italian and Irish gangs did not bother them. This was one of his first ways of making money from others. Around this time, Salvatore met a Jewish boy named Meyer Lansky. Salvatore tried to get money from Lansky by threatening him on his walk home from school. But Lansky was not afraid. He stood up to Salvatore and talked back to him. Salvatore respected this. Instead of becoming enemies, they became friends. This friendship would last for many years. During the years around World War I, Salvatore started learning about the business of pimping. This means he began to understand how some men made money from women who worked as prostitutes. He was still a young man, but he was learning many things about the criminal world. People began calling Salvatore by a new name, Lucky Luciano. It is not clear exactly how he got this nickname. Some people said it was because he survived a very bad beating in 1929. 3 men attacked him, cut his throat with a knife, and left him for dead. But he lived. Others said the name came from his luck when gambling. Some also thought it was simply because people mispronounced his last name, Lucania, and it slowly became Luciano. The newspapers started calling him Charles Luciano, and the name stuck. Between 1916 and 1936, Charles Luciano was arrested 25 times. Police arrested him for things like hitting people, running illegal gambling games, taking money by threats and stealing. But he never spent any time in prison during these years. He always found a way to get out of trouble. In 1920, a new law called Prohibition took effect in the United States. This law made it illegal to make, sell, or transport alcoholic drinks. But many people still wanted to drink. This created a big chance for criminals to make money by selling alcohol secretly. Charles Luciano saw this chance and took it. By this time, Luciano had met important criminals in New York. He knew Vito Genovese and Frank Costello through the 5 Points gang. He also started working for a man named Joe Masuria, who was a crime boss in Lower Manhattan. Masuria hired Luciano as one of his gunmen. Around the same time, Luciano began working with a gambler named Arnold Rothstein. Rothstein was smart and taught Luciano how to run a real business with illegal alcohol. Rothstein gave Luciano money to start his own bootlegging operation. Luciano, Costello, and Genovese worked together selling alcohol that was made illegally or brought into the country secretly. Rothstein taught Luciano many things. He showed him how to dress well and how to move among rich and powerful people. Luciano learned how to act like a businessman, not just a street criminal. He also started selling heroin that was brought in from Montreal, Canada. In 1923, Luciano was caught selling heroin to police officers who were working undercover. He did not go to prison, but people now knew he sold drugs. This hurt his image with his rich customers. To fix this, Luciano bought 200 expensive tickets to a big boxing match in the Bronx. He gave these tickets to important gangsters and politicians. He also bought nice clothes for the event. This worked, and people forgot about the drug arrest. By 1925, Luciano was making huge amounts of money. His bootlegging and illegal gambling operations in New York and Philadelphia were bringing in over $12 million every year. He personally kept about $4 million each year. He started living in a nice hotel called the Barbizon Plaza under the fake name Charles Lane. During the late 1920s, Luciano became a top assistant to Joe Masuria. But Masuria was old-fashioned. He would only work with men from Sicily and did not trust Italians from other parts of Italy. He certainly would not work with Jews or Irish people. Luciano thought this was foolish. He wanted to work with anyone who could help make money, including his Jewish friend Meyer Lansky. Masuria's main enemy was another boss named Salvatore Maranzano. The two bosses began fighting over power, and this fight became known as the Castellamarese War. In February 1930, Masuria ordered Luciano to kill one of his own men who had switched sides to Maranzano. Luciano did this, but he was growing tired of both Masuria and Maranzano. They were both old-style bosses who refused to change. Luciano and other young criminals wanted to work together with Jewish and Irish gangs to make more money. They wanted to create one big organization that controlled many kinds of crime. By early 1931, the war was going badly for Masuria. Luciano saw his chance. He made a secret deal with Maranzano. Luciano would have Masuria killed. In return, Luciano would take over Masuria's operations and become Maranzano's second-in-command. On April 15, 1931, Luciano had lunch with Masuria at a restaurant in Coney Island called Nuova Villa Tomorrow. They played cards. At some point, Luciano said he needed to use the bathroom. When he left the table, 4 gunmen walked into the restaurant. They shot and killed Masuria. The gunmen were Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Benjamin Siegel, who was called Bugsy. A man named Ciro Terranova drove the getaway car. With Masuria dead, the war ended, and Luciano took over Masuria's gang. But Luciano did not trust Maranzano. Maranzano had declared himself the boss of all bosses. He was also old-fashioned and greedy. He wanted to control everything. Luciano learned that Maranzano had hired a killer to murder him. Luciano decided to act first. On September 10, 1931, Maranzano asked Luciano, Genovese, and Costello to come to his office in Manhattan. Luciano believed this was a trap. He sent 4 Jewish gangsters, whose faces were not known to Maranzano's guards, to the office first. 2 of them dressed like government agents and took the guns from Maranzano's bodyguards. The other 2, along with a man named Tommy Lucchese, went into Maranzano's office. They stabbed him many times and then shot him. Maranzano was dead. After Maranzano died, Luciano became the most powerful crime boss in the United States. He did not take the title boss of all bosses. He thought this title caused problems and made a person a target. Instead, he created a new system. He kept the 5 crime families in New York that Maranzano had set up. Luciano's own family became known as the Luciano crime family. He made Genovese his underboss and Costello his consigliere, which is an advisor. Later in 1931, Luciano called a meeting with crime bosses from other cities. He proposed creating a group called the Commission. This group would be made up of top bosses from important families. They would meet to settle arguments and decide which family controlled which criminal activities. The goal was to stop gang wars and let everyone make money peacefully. The bosses agreed to this plan. Luciano's crime family controlled many illegal activities in New York. They ran gambling operations. They lent money at very high interest rates, which was called loan sharking. They took money from businesses by threatening them, which was extortion. They controlled parts of the waterfront, the garment district where clothes were made, and trucking companies. Luciano also became involved in labor unions, which gave him more power over workers and businesses. In the early 1930s, Luciano's family began taking over small prostitution businesses in New York. Prostitution means women selling sex for money. Luciano's men went to women who ran brothels, which are places where prostitution happens. They told these women they had to pay money to the Luciano family. If they did not pay, they would be hurt. The women had no choice but to pay. This was not really about running the prostitutes directly. It was about forcing the brothel owners to give them a cut of their money. This was a form of extortion. In June 1935, the governor of New York appointed a man named Thomas Dewey as a special prosecutor. Dewey's job was to fight organized crime in New York City. Dewey had a team of lawyers working for him. One of these lawyers was a woman named Eunice Carter. She began looking into the prostitution businesses in the city. She talked to women who worked as prostitutes. She also used wiretaps to listen to conversations. She found evidence that connected Luciano to the prostitution network. On February 2nd, 1936, Dewey ordered a large raid. Police went to 200 brothels in Manhattan and Brooklyn. They arrested 16 men and 87 women. But this time, things were different. In the past, people arrested in such raids were often released quickly. This time, a judge set high bail amounts of $10,000 for each person. The prostitutes and madams could not pay this. They were kept in jail. Carter talked to many of them. Some said they had been beaten and abused by the men working for Luciano. Carter convinced them to testify in court against Luciano and his men. By March, several people had named Luciano as the leader of the operation. In late March 1936, Luciano learned that he would soon be arrested. He fled New York and went to Hot Springs, Arkansas. But a detective from New York who was in Arkansas on another case saw him and told Dewey. On April 3rd, Luciano was arrested in Hot Springs on charges of running a prostitution business. Luciano's lawyers fought against being sent back to New York. A gangster named Downey Madden even tried to bribe the Arkansas Attorney General with $50,000 to help Luciano. The Attorney General refused and reported the bribe. On April 17th, Luciano was handed over to New York police and taken back by train for trial. The trial began on May 11, 1936. Dewey personally questioned Luciano and the other defendants. Witnesses, including several prostitutes, testified that Luciano was in charge of the prostitution ring. They said he met with them and talked about the business. One witness said Luciano described the prostitution operation as being like a chain of stores. Luciano also made a mistake. He testified in his own defense. Dewey asked him about his money. Luciano's income tax records said he only made $22,000 a year. But he lived in nice hotels and wore expensive clothes. Dewey also asked him about his many arrests and his friendships with known gangsters. Luciano could not explain these things well. On June 7, 1936, the jury found Luciano and 8 other men guilty on 62 counts of running a prostitution business. On June 18th, the judge sentenced Luciano to 30 to 50 years in state prison. He was first sent to Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. Later that year, he was moved to a more remote prison called Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, far from New York City. Even from prison, Luciano tried to run his crime family. He sent messages through Vito Genovese. But in 1937, Genovese fled to Italy to avoid being charged with murder. Luciano then made Frank Costello the acting boss of the family. Luciano stayed in prison, but his power on the streets continued through Costello. Charles Luciano remained in prison at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. He had been there since 1936. From his cell, he continued to give orders to Frank Costello, who ran the crime family on the outside. But Luciano's time in prison was about to take an unexpected turn. In 1942, the United States was fighting in World War II. The Office of Naval Intelligence had a problem. They were worried that German spies or saboteurs might enter the country through the New York waterfront. Ships and supplies were being loaded and sent to Europe from these docks. If someone damaged these ships, it could hurt the war effort. The Navy knew that the Mafia controlled the waterfront. The longshoremen who loaded ships listened to crime bosses, not to the government. The Navy needed help. They reached out to Meyer Lansky, Luciano's old friend and business partner. Lansky saw a chance to help Luciano. He told the Navy that Luciano could use his power to protect the docks. The Navy agreed to talk. To make this easier, Luciano was moved from the remote Dannemora prison to Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York. This was much closer to New York City and made meetings easier. A deal was made. Luciano promised that his organization would help protect the waterfront. He would make sure there were no strikes by dock workers during the war. He would also provide information to Navy intelligence. In return, the state of New York and the Navy would consider reducing his prison sentence. This secret cooperation between the government and the Mafia became known as Operation Underworld. In 1943, the United States planned to invade Sicily, which is part of Italy. Luciano allegedly gave the military names of Sicilian Mafia members who might help them. It is not clear how much Luciano's help actually mattered. Some officials later said his help was not very valuable. But in 1946, Governor Thomas Dewey, the same man who had sent Luciano to prison, made a decision. On January 3, 1946, Dewey agreed to reduce Luciano's sentence. But there was a condition. Luciano had to agree to be deported to Italy. He did not want to leave the United States. He still believed he was an American citizen and should not be sent away. But he had no choice. If he refused, he would stay in prison. He accepted the deal. On February 2, 1946, 2 immigration agents took Luciano from Sing Sing prison to Ellis Island in New York Harbor. This was the same place where he had first arrived from Italy as a boy 40 years earlier. Now he was being processed for deportation. On February 9th, the night before he left, his friends came to say goodbye. Albert Anastasia and 5 others shared a spaghetti dinner with him on the ship. The next day, February 10th, the ship sailed from Brooklyn to Italy. On February 28th, after 17 days at sea, the ship arrived in Naples, Italy. Luciano was back in the country where he was born, but he did not stay there quietly. In October 1946, he secretly traveled to Cuba. He went from Italy to Venezuela, then to Brazil, then to Mexico, and finally back to Venezuela before flying to Cuba. He arrived on October 29th and moved into a house in Havana. He wanted to be closer to the United States so he could control his criminal operations again. In December 1946, Luciano organized a meeting of major crime bosses in Havana. This became known as the Havana Conference. The bosses met at the Hotel Nacional de Cuba. They talked about drug trafficking, gambling in Cuba, and what to do about Bugsy Siegel, who was having problems with his Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. During the meeting, Luciano had a private talk with Vito Genovese. Genovese suggested that Luciano become the boss of all bosses again and let Genovese run things day to day. Luciano refused. He did not trust Genovese and told him never to suggest this again. But Luciano's time in Cuba did not last long. The United States government learned he was there. He had been seen in public with famous people like singer Frank Sinatra. He went to nightclubs and was easy to spot. The head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Harry Anslinger, put pressure on Cuba. He said the United States would stop sending medical drugs to Cuba if Luciano stayed. On February 23, 1947, the Cuban government arrested Luciano and said he would be sent back to Italy within 48 hours. Luciano was put on a ship to Genoa, Italy. When he arrived on April 11, 1947, Italian police arrested him and sent him to jail in Palermo. On May 11th, he was released but told to stay out of trouble. For the rest of his life, Luciano lived in Italy under police watch. He had to report to police regularly and could not leave Naples without permission. Even from Italy, Luciano tried to stay involved in criminal business. But his power was fading. In the United States, Vito Genovese was making moves to take control. In 1957, Genovese ordered an attack on Frank Costello. A gunman named Vincent Gigani shot at Costello in his apartment building. The bullet only grazed Costello's head, and he survived. But Costello decided to retire and gave control to Genovese. Later that year, Genovese also arranged the murder of Albert Anastasia, another Luciano ally. In November 1957, Genovese called a meeting of crime bosses in Appalachian, New York. He wanted to show he was now in charge. But police found out about the meeting and raided it. Over 65 mobsters were arrested. This was very bad for the mafia. The bosses were angry at Genovese for causing this disaster. Luciano saw an opening. He allegedly helped pay money to a drug dealer to falsely accuse Genovese of drug crimes. In April 1959, Genovese was convicted of drug conspiracy and sent to prison for 15 years. He died in prison in 1969. In his personal life, Luciano found some happiness. In 1948, he met a young Italian dancer named Igia Lissoni. She was 20 years younger than him. They fell in love, and she moved into his house in Naples. Some people said they married in 1949. Others said they only exchanged rings, but did not have an official wedding. They lived together for many years, but Luciano continued to see other women, and they argued about this. Sometimes he hit her during these arguments. In 1959, Igia died of breast cancer. Luciano was very sad. He never had children. He once said he did not want a son to grow up known as the child of a gangster. On January 26, 1962, Luciano went to Naples airport. He was going to meet with a movie producer named Martin Gosch. They were going to talk about making a film about his life. Luciano had always refused to allow a movie before, but after Igia died, he changed his mind. After the meeting, Luciano had a heart attack at the airport and died. He was 64 years old. At that moment, Italian drug agents were at the airport waiting to arrest him on drug smuggling charges. They did not know he had died. 3 days later, about 300 people attended a funeral for Luciano in Naples. His body was carried through the streets in a horse-drawn wagon pulled by black horses. The United States government gave permission for his family to bring his body back to New York for burial. He was buried in St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. More than 2,000 people came to his funeral. Carlo Gambino, an old friend and crime boss, spoke at the service. Charles Luciano changed the American Mafia. He created the Commission to prevent gang wars. He worked with criminals from different backgrounds. He showed that organized crime could be run like a business. His life moved from poor immigrant boy to powerful crime boss to prisoner to exile. He died far from the country where he had built his power, but his body was finally returned to New York, the city where he had become known as Lucky Luciano. Story 2. Benjamin Siegel was born on February 28, 1906, in the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, in New York City. He was the second of 5 children. His parents were poor Jewish immigrants from a region that was then part of Austria-Hungary. His father's name was Max Siegel. His mother's name was Jenny Siegel. Both of his parents worked very hard, but earned very little money. The family struggled to get by. As a young boy, Benjamin stopped going to school. He left his education behind. He began to spend his time on the streets. He joined a gang on Lafayette Street, which was on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. In the beginning, he committed small crimes, mostly stealing things. During this time, he met a boy named Mo Sedway. Together, Benjamin and Mo came up with a way to make money from street vendors who sold goods from pushcarts. They would threaten these vendors. They told the vendors that if they did not pay them $1, they would burn their merchandise. The vendors were scared and paid them. This was one of his first organized criminal activities. By the time he was a teenager, Benjamin had built up a long record of crimes. This record included serious offenses like armed robbery and murder. He was known to be violent from a young age. When he was still young, Benjamin met another boy from his neighborhood named Meyer Lansky. Meyer was very smart and had ideas about forming a group of young Jewish criminals. He thought they needed to organize themselves, just like the Italian and Irish gangs in the city did. The first person Meyer Lansky asked to join his new gang was Benjamin Siegel. Benjamin and Meyer became close partners. They formed their own gang, which was called the Bugs and Meyer Mob. They became involved in bootlegging. Bootlegging meant selling alcohol illegally during a time in American history called Prohibition, when alcohol was against the law. They smuggled and sold alcohol in many big cities on the East Coast. Benjamin also worked as a hitman. A hitman is someone who is paid to kill people. Meyer Lansky would sometimes lend out Benjamin's services to other crime groups who needed someone killed. The Bugs and Meyer Mob became known for carrying out murders for different bootleg gangs in New York and New Jersey. This happened almost 10 years before another famous criminal group called Murder Incorporated was even formed. The gang was also very busy hijacking trucks that belonged to other gangs. Hijacking means stealing the cargo, in this case, the illegal liquor. They became known for killing and getting rid of several rival gangsters. One member of the gang later remembered that Benjamin was not afraid of anything. He said that when danger appeared, while others were trying to think of the best thing to do, Benjamin was already shooting his gun. He was seen as a man with a lot of courage and a man of action. During this time, Benjamin also met a boy who would become a very famous gangster, Al Capone. When the police had a warrant to arrest Al Capone for murder, Benjamin let him hide out at his aunt's house. In his youth, Benjamin also tried smoking opium, which is an illegal drug. He was involved in the drug trade as well. By the time he was 21 years old, he was making a lot of money. He had enough money to buy an apartment in a very fancy hotel in New York called the Waldorf Astoria. He also bought a house in Scarsdale, a wealthy area outside the city. He wore expensive, flashy clothes and went out often to enjoy New York City's nightlife. On January 28, 1929, Benjamin married a girl he had known since childhood named Esta Krakauer. They later had 2 daughters. Their first daughter was named Millicent. Their second daughter was named Barbara. However, Benjamin had a reputation for being interested in many women. Even though he was married, he had relationships with other women. In the late 1920s, Benjamin and Meyer Lansky became connected with 2 very important Italian gangsters, Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello. These men would later become bosses of a powerful crime family. On April 15, 1931, it is believed that Benjamin was one of 4 gunmen who killed a New York mob boss named Joe Masuria. This killing was done on the orders of Lucky Luciano. It helped end a gang war called the Castellamarese War. Later that same year, on September 10th, Lucky Luciano hired gunmen from the Bugs and Meyer mob to kill another mob boss, Salvatore Maranzano. Some sources say Benjamin was one of those gunmen. This murder allowed Lucky Luciano to become the most powerful mobster in New York. After Maranzano was killed, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky helped form the National Crime Syndicate. This was an organization that brought many different crime families together to work under a set of rules. A governing body called the Commission was created to stop gangs from fighting each other over territory. With his associates, Benjamin helped form a group that became known as Murder Incorporated, which was a group of killers for hire. Even after he and Meyer Lansky moved on to other things, Benjamin continued to work as a hitman. In 1932, Benjamin got into a dispute with 3 brothers named Fabrizio. These brothers worked for another gangster. The brothers tried to kill Benjamin and Meyer Lansky. They brought a bomb to Benjamin's suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, but they failed. Benjamin then hunted down and killed 2 of the brothers. The third brother, Tony Fabrizio, was scared and started writing a book about his life. He planned to write a long chapter about the nationwide group of killers that Benjamin led. Before he could finish, Benjamin found out about his plan. In 1932, Benjamin checked into a hospital to create an alibi. An alibi is proof that a person was somewhere else when a crime happened. He sneaked out of the hospital, went with 2 other men to Tony's house, pretended to be a detective, and when Tony came outside, they shot and killed him. By 1935, Benjamin had learned that some of his enemies wanted him dead. His alibi about being in the hospital had become questionable, and people didn't believe it anymore. To protect him, the Mafia decided to send Benjamin to California. His job there was to start up and manage new gambling operations that were approved by the syndicate. He was to work with the local Los Angeles mob boss, a man named Jack Dragna. Benjamin took another gangster named Mickey Cohen with him to California as his main assistant. Jack Dragna knew about Benjamin's violent reputation and that he was backed by powerful men like Meyer Lansky. Because of this, Jack Dragna accepted that Benjamin would be the one in charge. Once Benjamin Siegel arrived in California, he began to build his criminal operations. He knew he was backed by powerful men in the East, so he moved forward with confidence. His first goal was to take control of the illegal gambling in Los Angeles. He took over the numbers racket, which was a type of illegal lottery. He also used money from the crime syndicate to help start a drug smuggling route from Mexico. This brought in large amounts of money. Benjamin also saw an opportunity to make money from the movie industry in Hollywood. He made a plan to extort the movie studios. Extortion means taking money from someone by using threats. His plan was to take control of local labor unions. Unions are groups of workers. He would then force the unions to go on strike. A strike means the workers stop working. If the movie studios could not make movies, they would lose money. Benjamin would then tell the studio bosses that if they paid him money, he would make the unions start working again. The studios would have to pay him to solve the problem he created. This was a scheme to get rich from the movie business. During this time, Benjamin became friends with many famous movie stars. He was seen with actors like George Raft, Clark Gable, and Cary Cooper. He went to parties and was welcomed in the highest social circles in Hollywood. He used these friendships to his advantage. He would borrow money from these wealthy stars. He borrowed more than $400,000 in his first year alone. He never paid the money back. He knew the stars would be too afraid to ask him for it. In 1939, a problem arose. A former friend and fellow gangster named Harry Greenberg had become a threat. Harry Greenberg, who was also called Big Greenie, was planning to become an informant for the police. An informant is someone who gives secret information to the police about criminals. A powerful mob boss in New York named Louis Buckleter ordered that Harry Greenberg be killed to stop him from talking. On November 22, 1939, Benjamin Siegel took action. He went with 3 other men to the apartment building where Harry Greenberg lived in the Hollywood Hills. When Harry Greenberg came outside, they killed him. Benjamin was directly involved in this murder. The killing was meant to send a message and to protect the mob's secrets. After the murder, one of the men who took part, Albert Tannenbaum, confessed to the police. He agreed to testify against Benjamin in court. In September 1941, Benjamin was put on trial for the murder of Harry Greenberg. The trial became famous, not just for the crime, but for how Benjamin was treated while in jail. He refused to eat the prison food. He was allowed to have female visitors. He was even allowed to leave the jail to go to the dentist. Many people thought he was receiving special treatment because he was a powerful gangster. The newspapers wrote many stories about him. They often called him Bugsy Siegel. Benjamin hated this name. The word Bugs was old slang for crazy. He did not like people to think he was crazy or unpredictable. He wanted to be called Ben or Mr. Siegel. During the trial, a reporter named Floribel Muir wrote stories about him. Benjamin became angry with her. He threatened her, saying that people outside the jail could hurt her if he gave the word. He did not want her to write bad things about him. Benjamin hired a very good lawyer named Jerry Giesler. While the trial was going on, 2 important witnesses who were going to testify against him died. No one was ever charged with their deaths, but their absence helped Benjamin. Without these witnesses, and with questions about the other witnesses' story, the case against Benjamin grew weak. In 1942, the court found Benjamin not guilty. He was acquitted and walked free. Even though he was free, the trial had hurt his public image. In 1944, Benjamin was arrested again, this time for bookmaking, which is another word for illegal gambling. His actor friend George Raft spoke well of him in court. Benjamin was found not guilty in this case as well. By 1946, Benjamin had his attention on a new place, Las Vegas, Nevada. He had visited the area years before and saw its potential for gambling. He found a big opportunity with a man named William R. Wilkerson. Mr. Wilkerson had started building a fancy new hotel and casino called the Flamingo. But he ran out of money and could not finish it. Benjamin saw his chance. He wanted to turn the Flamingo into a luxury resort that would attract rich gamblers from all over the country. He believed if he offered the best food, the best drinks, the best entertainment, and a beautiful casino, people would come and spend a lot of money. Benjamin made a deal to take control of the Flamingo project. He used money from his mob partners in the East, including Meyer Lansky, to fund the construction. Mr. Wilkerson was forced to sell his shares and leave the project. From that point, the Flamingo was run by the crime syndicate. Benjamin oversaw every detail of the construction. However, the costs began to grow much higher than planned. The budget went from $4 million to over $6 million. Benjamin wanted everything to be perfect. He did not worry about how much money he was spending. This worried his partners back east. They had invested a lot of money and wanted to see profits. The Flamingo Hotel finally opened on December 26, 1946. However, it was not finished. The hotel rooms were not ready, and the lobby was still full of construction equipment. Some movie stars came to the opening, but many local people came just to look at the unfinished building. On the first night, the casino lost a lot of money. Benjamin became very angry and threw some people out of the casino. After 2 weeks, the Flamingo had lost almost $300,000. Benjamin had to close the casino to finish the construction. He kept working on the hotel. The Flamingo reopened on March 1st, 1947, this time with the hotel rooms ready. The casino began to make money. It was finally starting to work. But it was too late for Benjamin. His partners in the crime syndicate had lost their patience. They had watched him spend millions of dollars more than planned. They believed that a large amount of money, maybe $1 million, had been stolen. They suspected that either Benjamin or his girlfriend, a woman named Virginia Hill, had taken the money for themselves. They were no longer willing to trust him or wait for their profits. A decision was made about what to do with Benjamin Siegel. On the night of June 20th, 1947, Benjamin Siegel was at a house in Beverly Hills, California. The house was on Linden Drive. It was a large mansion that his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was renting. Benjamin was not living there, but he often visited. That night, Virginia Hill was not at home. She was in France. Also in the house were Benjamin's friend and associate, Alan Smiley, Virginia Hill's brother named Chick Hill, Chick's girlfriend, and a cook. Benjamin was sitting on a sofa in the living room. He was reading a newspaper, the Los Angeles Times. Alan Smiley was sitting next to him. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. Outside the house, there was a lot of shrubbery or bushes near the window. An archway in the driveway led to a spot close to the living room window. Someone was hiding in that spot behind the bushes. That person was holding a rifle. It was a .30 caliber M1 carbine. He was very close to the window, only about 14 feet away. He rested his gun on a wooden trellis just outside the window. The shooter fired through the window. He fired 9 shots in total. 4 of the bullets hit Benjamin Siegel. 1 bullet hit him in the face, near his nose. It destroyed his left eye and came out the back of his neck. Another bullet went through his cheek and out his neck. 2 more bullets hit him in the chest. The bullets that missed him hit a marble statue on a piano in the room. Alan Smiley was hit on the arm by 1 bullet, but his injury was not serious. The shooting was over very fast. Benjamin Siegel was killed instantly. The shooter ran away and was never seen or identified. The police arrived quickly because people in the neighborhood heard the shots and called them. A reporter named Flora Belmure, who had covered Benjamin's trial years before, also arrived at the scene very quickly. She saw Benjamin's body and the damage from the bullets. The police began their investigation. They found the 9 bullet shells outside the window. A senior forensic expert from the Beverly Hills Police Department looked at the evidence. He thought it was possible that 2 shooters were involved, because the shots to Benjamin's face were very precise. However, the police were never able to find the shooter or shooters. No one was ever arrested for the murder of Benjamin Siegel. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. However, investigators and writers have developed theories about what happened. The most common theory is that Benjamin's own mob partners ordered his death. They were angry about the money he spent building the Flamingo Hotel. They believed he and his girlfriend had stolen at least $1 million from the construction budget. A meeting of top crime syndicate leaders had been held in Havana, Cuba, in late 1946. At that meeting, it is believed they decided that Benjamin Siegel had to be killed. One of the men at that meeting was his old friend Meyer Lansky. According to later accounts, Meyer Lansky was very sad, but he agreed with the decision because Benjamin had broken their trust. The timing of events right after the murder provides strong support for this theory. Only minutes after Benjamin was shot and killed in Beverly Hills, three men walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. The men were Mo Sedway, Gus Greenbaum, and David Berman. Mo Sedway was Benjamin's old friend from New York. The three men told the staff at the Flamingo that they were now in charge. They took over the management of the hotel and casino immediately. It would have been nearly impossible for them to arrive in Las Vegas that quickly unless they knew in advance that Benjamin was going to be killed. This shows that the murder was carefully planned. Other theories about the murder exist. One theory suggested that the shooter was a man who was having an affair with Mo Sedway's wife. Another theory claimed that a different gangster named Frankie Carbo killed Benjamin on the orders of Meyer Lansky. Years later, another man claimed that he was the one who shot Benjamin, but none of these claims were ever proven. The identity of the shooter remains unknown. The day after the murder, a newspaper in Los Angeles printed a photograph of Benjamin Siegel's body in the morgue. His murder became national news. It put the spotlight on Las Vegas and the new casinos being built there. Benjamin Siegel was buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. His father, Max Siegel, had died just 2 months before his son. At a synagogue in New York, there is a plaque that marks the date of Benjamin's death so people can remember him. At the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, there is also a small memorial plaque for him between the pool and a wedding chapel. The Flamingo Hotel still stands today, a reminder of the man who helped build it. Benjamin Siegel's life ended by violence, the same violence he had used against so many others. His murder was never solved, and the men who planned it continued to run the casinos and criminal operations he had started. Story 3. David Berkowitz was born on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. His birth name was Richard David Falco. His biological mother was a waitress named Elizabeth Betty Broder. She had been married to a man named Tony Falco, but he had left her years before David was born. David's biological father was a different man, a married businessman named Joseph Kleinman. Within a few days of his birth, his mother gave him up for adoption. The baby was adopted by a middle-aged couple named Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz. They lived in the Bronx and ran a small hardware store. They were Jewish and had no children of their own. They changed the baby's name to David Richard Berkowitz and raised him as their only son. David grew up in the Bronx. He had a bar mitzvah ceremony when he was 13. As a child, he was sometimes bullied by other children for being Jewish and for being overweight. His childhood was described as somewhat troubled. Even though he was smart, he lost interest in school early on. He began to get into small troubles like stealing and setting fires. He also suffered some injuries to his head. People who knew him said he could be difficult and spoiled, and he acted like a bully. His parents were so concerned about his behavior that they took him to see a therapist, but his problems never led to serious trouble with the law or at school. When David was 14 years old, his adoptive mother, Pearl, died of breast cancer. After her death, his home life became difficult. He did not get along with the new woman his father married. He continued living with his father in the Co-op City section of the Bronx and attended Christopher Columbus High School, graduating in 1971. After high school, at the age of 17, David joined the United States Army. He served at Fort Knox and was also sent to South Korea with an infantry division. He was honorably discharged from the Army in June 1974. After leaving the Army, David decided to find his birth mother. He located a woman named Betty Broder, and they met a few times. During these visits, she told him the truth about his birth, that he was adopted, and that his biological father was a different man, not the man his mother was married to at the time. Learning these details was a great shock to David. It deeply disturbed him and made him feel confused about who he was. He eventually stopped communicating with his birth mother. For a short time, he stayed in touch with his adoptive sister, Rosalind. He attended Bronx Community College for 1 year, starting in early 1975. Then, in 1976, he took a job driving a taxi in Co-op City. After that, he had several other small jobs. At the time of his arrest, he would be working for the United States Postal Service, sorting letters. He was living in an apartment in Yonkers, a city just north of New York City. In late 1975, David Berkowitz began his violent acts. His first attack happened on Christmas Eve in the Co-op City area where he had lived. He used a hunting knife to stab 2 women. The first woman was never identified by police. The second was a 15-year-old girl named Michelle Foreman. He stabbed her 6 times on a bridge. She was hurt badly and had to stay in the hospital for a week. Police did not connect Berkowitz to these stabbings. Soon after, he moved to an apartment in Yonkers. For a while, he did not attack anyone. Then, on the night of July 29, 1976, he committed his first shooting. He was in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx. He saw 2 young women sitting in a parked car. Their names were Donna Loria, who was 18, and Jody Valeni, who was 19. Berkowitz walked toward the car holding a paper bag. Inside the bag was a gun. He got close, crouched down, and fired. Donna Loria was hit and died instantly. Jody Valeni was shot in the leg, but survived. Berkowitz turned and walked away. Jody described the shooter to police as a white man with dark curly hair. Police did not have any suspects. 3 months later, on October 23, 1976, another shooting happened in Queens. Carl Denaro, age 20, and Rosemary Keenan, age 18, were sitting in a parked car. Suddenly, their car windows shattered. Someone was shooting at them. A bullet hit Carl in the head. Rosemary was not hit by a bullet, but was cut by glass. She started the car and drove away quickly. Neither of them saw the shooter. Carl survived but needed a metal plate put in his skull. Police found bullets in the car. They were .44 caliber. The police did not link this shooting to the one in July because they happened in different areas of the city. 1 month later, on November 27, 1976, Berkowitz struck again. It was just after midnight in the Floral Park area of Queens. 2 teenage girls, Donna DeMazy, age 16, and Joan Lomino, age 18, were sitting on a porch. A man dressed in military clothes walked up to them and started to ask for directions. Then, he pulled out a gun and shot both of them. He fired more shots at the house before running away. A neighbor saw a blond man running with a gun. Donna was shot in the neck but survived. Joan was shot in the back and was hurt very badly. She would never be able to walk again. Police now had 2 different descriptions, one of a dark-haired man from the first shooting and one of a blond man from this shooting. 2 months later, on January 30th, 1977, Berkowitz targeted a couple in a car again. Christine Freund, age 26, and John Deal, age 30, were sitting in their car in Queens. 3 gunshots hit the car. John drove away for help. He had minor injuries. Christine was hit twice and died at the hospital hours later. They did not see the shooter. After this, police began to think the shootings might be connected. All the victims were shot with .44 caliber bullets. Most of the victims were young women with dark hair. On March 8, 1977, Berkowitz killed again. Virginia Voskerikian was a 20-year-old college student. She was walking home in Queens, not far from where Christine Freund had been shot. A man confronted her. She tried to protect herself by holding her textbooks up in front of her face. The man shot her in the head and she died. 2 days later, police held a press conference. They announced that the same .44 caliber gun had been used in several of the shootings, including the killings of Donna Loria and Virginia Voskerikian. The attacks continued. On April 17, 1977, Alexander Esau, age 20, and Valentina Suriani, age 18, were sitting in a car in the Bronx. It was about 3 in the morning, and the car was parked near Valentina's home. A neighbor heard 4 shots and called police. Both victims had been shot in the head. Valentina died at the scene. Alexander died in the hospital a few hours later. Police confirmed the same gun was used. Near the bodies, police found a handwritten letter. It was addressed to a police captain. In the letter, the killer called himself the son of Sam for the first time. The letter was strange and angry. It talked about a father named Sam who commanded him to kill. It also threatened the police. Police kept the letter secret at first, but the name Son of Sam was given to the press and became the killer's public nickname. About a month later, on May 30th, 1977, a famous newspaper columnist named Jimmy Breslin received a letter from someone claiming to be the killer. The letter was longer and more carefully written than the first one. It mocked the police and threatened more violence. It asked a question about July 29th, which was the anniversary of the first shooting. The newspaper published the letter. This caused a huge public reaction. Thousands of tips came in, but none led to an arrest. Many women in New York City were scared. Because most victims had long dark hair, many women cut their hair short or dyed it different colors. On June 26, 1977, Berkowitz shot again. Salvatore Lupo, age 20, and Judy Placido, age 17, were sitting in a parked car in Queens after leaving a nightclub. 3 shots hit the car. Both were wounded but survived. They told police they had been talking about the Son of Sam case just before the shooting. The final shooting happened on July 31st, 1977, in the Brooklyn area of the city. Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violani, both 20 years old, were on their first date. They were parked near a park. A man walked up to the car and fired 4 shots. Both were hit in the head. Stacy died from her injuries. Robert survived but lost his left eye. Stacy was the only victim who was blonde. After this shooting, police began a massive search for the killer. After the shooting of Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violani, police worked hard to find clues. A woman named Cecilia Davis was walking her dog near the crime scene that night. She saw a police officer giving a parking ticket to a car parked near a fire hydrant. After the officer left, a young man walked past her from the direction of that car. He seemed to stare at her. She felt scared and ran home. Right after she ran inside, she heard gunshots. For days later, she called police and told them what she saw. Police then checked every car that had received a parking ticket in that area that night. One of the cars belonged to David Berkowitz. It was a yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy. On August 9, 1977, a detective named James Justice called the Yonkers Police Department. He asked them to help set up an interview with David Berkowitz. The person who answered the phone at the Yonkers Police Dispatch was a woman named Wheat Carr. When she heard the name David Berkowitz, she told the detective she knew him. She said he lived in the apartment right behind her house. She also told him that Berkowitz had shot her family's black Labrador Retriever dog. The dog belonged to her father, whose name was Sam Carr. When the detective heard the name Sam, he felt strongly that Berkowitz might be the son of Sam. He asked Yonkers police to help find him. The next day, August 10, 1977, police went to Berkowitz's apartment building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. They looked at his car, which was parked outside. Through the window, they saw a gun in the back seat. They searched the car and found a duffel bag. Inside the bag were ammunition, maps of the areas where the shootings happened, and another threatening letter addressed to a police inspector. Police decided to wait for Berkowitz to come out of his apartment instead of going in after him. They also waited for a search warrant for his apartment. At about 10 o'clock that night, Berkowitz came out of the building and got into his car. Police officers approached the car quickly. One detective pointed his gun at Berkowitz's head from the driver's side. Another detective pointed his gun from the passenger side. In the car next to Berkowitz, police found a paper bag. Inside the bag was a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. This was the same type of gun used in all the shootings. Berkowitz looked at the officers and said, "Well, you got me." When asked who he was, he said, "I'm Sam." He was arrested without any struggle. Police searched Berkowitz's apartment. They found it messy and covered with satanic writings on the walls. They also found 3 notebooks that he had been keeping for years. In these notebooks, he had written down details of hundreds of fires he had set around New York City. He later admitted to being responsible for more than 2,000 fires in the 1970s. People had called the unknown fire setter the Phantom of the Bronx. Berkowitz was taken to a police station for questioning. He confessed to all the shootings very quickly. He told police that his neighbor's dog was the reason he killed. He said the dog, a black Labrador owned by Sam Carr, was possessed by a demon. He claimed the demon commanded him to kill young women. He also said the name Sam in his letters came from his neighbor, Sam Carr. A few weeks after his arrest, Berkowitz wrote letters to the press from jail. In one letter, he suggested there might be other people involved in the killings. He wrote, "There are other sons out there." Later, in 1979, he held a press conference and admitted that his story about the demon dog was a lie. He said he had made the whole thing up. Before his trial, doctors examined Berkowitz to see if he was mentally healthy enough to stand trial. 3 different examinations said he was. His lawyers wanted him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but he refused. On May 8, 1978, he appeared in court and pleaded guilty to all the shootings. At his sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Berkowitz acted wildly. He tried to jump out a courtroom window. When officers stopped him, he shouted ugly things about his victims. He yelled, "I'd kill her again. I'd kill them all again." Because of this outburst, the court ordered another mental examination. Again, doctors found him competent to stand trial. On June 12, 1978, Berkowitz was sentenced to prison. He received 25 years to life in prison for each murder. The sentences were to be served one after another, not at the same time. He was sent to Attica Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in upstate New York. In prison, Berkowitz has had a complicated life. In 1979, another inmate attacked him and slashed his neck badly. He needed more than 50 stitches. He refused to name his attacker and said he deserved the punishment. After this, he was kept in solitary confinement for his own safety. He was moved to different prisons over the years. In 1987, Berkowitz said he had become an evangelical Christian. He read a Bible given to him by another inmate and said he found religion. He asked to be called the Son of Hope instead of Son of Sam. He started writing about faith and remorse. He has said many times that he believes he deserves to stay in prison for the rest of his life. Berkowitz has had parole hearings every 2 years as required by law. He has often asked for these hearings to be canceled. He has written letters saying he accepts his punishment and should not be released. At his hearings, he has expressed remorse for his crimes. Parole has been denied every time. His most recent parole denial was in May 2024. His next hearing is scheduled for May 2026. Over the years, Berkowitz has changed his story about the crimes. In the 1990s, he began claiming he was part of a satanic cult and that other people helped him commit the murders. He said he only shot 3 of the victims himself. He named 2 men, John and Michael Carr, as his accomplices. Both men were already dead by that time. Some investigators and journalists believed his new story. In 1996, police reopened the investigation to look into these claims. After years of work, they found no proof to support what Berkowitz said. The investigation was eventually closed, but remains open in case new evidence appears. Many other people, including some victims and police officers, do not believe his cult story. They think he acted alone and made up the cult claims to get attention or feel less guilty. The Son of Sam case had a lasting effect on the law. After Berkowitz was arrested, people worried he would make money by selling his story. The state of New York passed a new law to stop criminals from profiting from books or movies about their crimes. This was called the Son of Sam Law. Other states passed similar laws. The United States Supreme Court later ruled that the original New York law was not allowed because it violated free speech. But New York created a new version of the law that was allowed to stand. Berkowitz remains in prison today. He continues to write about his Christian faith and counsel other inmates. The victims' families have lived with the pain of his crimes for decades. In 2006, the mother of his last victim, Stacy Moskowitz, wrote him a letter before she died. In the letter, she forgave him for killing her daughter. This brought a small measure of peace to a story filled with so much violence and sorrow. David Berkowitz, the man who terrorized New York City as the Son of Sam, has spent more than 4 decades in prison for his crimes and will likely remain there for the rest of his life. Story 4. Albert DeSalvo was born in 1931 in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is a city near Boston. His father was a violent man who worked as a plumber. Albert's childhood was very difficult. His father would often beat his wife and children. He also brought prostitutes into the family home. Because of this, Albert and his siblings grew up in a house filled with fear and confusion. The family was very poor, and they lived in bad conditions. When Albert was a young boy, he did not behave well at school. He was often in trouble. He did not have many friends. Police and social workers who later studied his life found that he was arrested for the first time when he was still a teenager. He was caught breaking into a car. Around this time, his parents separated, and his life became even more unstable. As a young man, DeSalvo joined the United States Army. He served in Germany. While in the Army, he met a woman and married her. His wife later said that he was a good husband at first. After he left the Army, they moved back to the Boston area and started a family. They had 2 children. To support his family, DeSalvo worked different jobs. He became a laborer and later worked as a mechanic. To people who knew him in his neighborhood, DeSalvo seemed like a normal family man. He was friendly and talked to people easily. But he had a secret life. In 1960, before the strangling murders began, he started committing other crimes. He would go to apartment buildings and knock on doors. He would trick women into letting him inside. Sometimes he pretended to be a modeling agent. He would measure women for clothes, saying he worked for a magazine. While doing this, he would touch them inappropriately. Because of this, police later gave him the nickname, the Measuring Man. He was arrested for these crimes in 1961 and spent time in a mental hospital for evaluation. Doctors there said he had a personality disorder, but was not insane. He was released after a short time. After his release, he went back to his family and his job. He continued to live 2 lives. To his wife and children, he was a father. To himself, he was a man who could not control his desires. He continued to knock on doors and trick his way into women's homes. His methods became more forceful. Women in Boston began to report that a man was entering their apartments, sometimes pretending to be a repairman or a detective. He would tie them up and assault them. Police did not connect these reports to DeSalvo at the time. They were looking for a man they later called the Green Man, because of the green pants he sometimes wore during these attacks. By the early 1960s, DeSalvo was living in a small house in Malden, Massachusetts, with his wife and children. He worked during the day. At night, he sometimes left the house without telling his wife where he was going. She did not ask many questions. She later said that he seemed tired and nervous during this time, but she did not know why. He would come home late and go to sleep. Nothing in his daily life suggested to his family that he was involved in anything serious. They saw him as a hard-working husband who provided for them. In late 1964, DeSalvo was involved in an incident in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. He approached a house pretending to have car trouble. The man who lived there became suspicious and pointed a gun at him. DeSalvo ran away. That same day, he entered another woman's home nearby. He tied her up and assaulted her. This time, the woman gave police a clear description of him. When his picture was printed in the newspaper, several other women came forward and identified him as the man who had attacked them. Police arrested him. At the time of his arrest, they did not connect him to the strangling murders that had terrified Boston for the past 2 years. They only knew him as a man who broke into homes and attacked women. He was placed in a cell to wait for his trial on these charges. He began to talk to the other inmates. One of them was a man named George Nasser. DeSalvo told Nasser things that Nasser later reported to his lawyer. This conversation in the cell was the starting point for everything that would come next. From his jail cell, Albert DeSalvo began to talk to another inmate named George Nasser. DeSalvo told Nasser that he was the person responsible for the deaths of women in Boston. Nasser believed him and told his lawyer, F. Lee Bailey. Bailey was a famous defense attorney. Bailey came to talk to DeSalvo in jail. DeSalvo told Bailey that he wanted to confess to being the Boston Strangler. DeSalvo told Bailey that the killings began in June of 1962. The first victim was a 55-year-old woman named Anna Sleezers. She lived in an apartment on Gainsborough Street in Boston. DeSalvo said he went to her door and pretended to be a maintenance man. She let him inside. Inside the apartment, he attacked her. He used the cord from her bathrobe to strangle her. He left her body on the floor. Police who looked at the scene saw no signs of a break-in. This meant the woman had let the killer in herself. This became a pattern. 2 weeks later, on June 28, 1962, an 85-year-old woman named Mary Mullen was found dead in her apartment on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston. She was not sexually assaulted. DeSalvo later said this was because she had a heart attack and died when he was there. He said he panicked and left. But 2 days after that, on June 30th, he killed again. 2 women were found dead on the same day. One was Nina Nichols, 68 years old, in her apartment on Commonwealth Avenue. The other was Helen Blake, 65 years old, in the city of Lynn. Both had been strangled with their own stockings or clothing. DeSalvo explained to the lawyer how he chose his victims. He would walk through neighborhoods in Boston and nearby cities like Cambridge, Lynn, and Salem. He looked for apartment buildings. He would knock on doors. If a young or strong man answered, he would pretend he had the wrong address and leave. If an older woman or a woman who lived alone answered, he would use a trick to get inside. Sometimes he said he was a maintenance man sent to fix the pipes. Other times he said he was a detective checking the building for safety. The women trusted him and opened the door. Once inside, he would attack them. He used his hands or ligatures like belts, stockings, or cords to strangle them. After the women were dead, he often posed their bodies in sexual positions. This was done to shock the person who would find them. He took small items from their apartments sometimes, but he did not steal money or valuable things. This confused police because it was not a normal robbery. In August of 1962, he killed 2 more women. On August 19th, he killed Eads Erga, 75 years old, in her apartment on Grove Street in Boston. 2 days later, on August 21st, he killed Jane Sullivan, 67 years old, on Columbia Road in Boston. The pattern continued. The victims were all women who lived alone. They ranged in age from 19 to 85. They did not all look alike. They did not all live in the same neighborhood. This made it very hard for police to predict where he would strike next. On December 5, 1962, he killed Sophie Clark, a 20-year-old student, in her apartment on Huntington Avenue in Boston. She was African American. Most of the previous victims were white. This again confused investigators because serial killers usually target one specific type of victim. DeSalvo did not seem to have a type. Before the end of the year, on December 31st, he killed Patricia Bissett, a 23-year-old woman, in her apartment on Park Drive in Boston. The attacks continued into 1963. On March 6th, he killed Mary Brown, 69 years old, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. On May 8th, he killed Beverly Summons, 23 years old, in Cambridge. Her murder was different. She had been stabbed many times. DeSalvo explained this by saying she fought back harder than the others. He said he lost control. On September 8th, he killed Evelyn Corbin, 57 years old, in Salem. On November 23rd, he killed Joan Graff, 23 years old, in Lawrence. The last victim was Mary Sullivan. She was 19 years old. On January 4th, 1964, she was found in her apartment on Charles Street in Boston. She had been strangled with a ligature. A broom handle had been inserted into her body. A card that said "Happy New Year" was propped against her foot. This was the most disturbing crime scene of all. During the time these murders were happening, the city of Boston was terrified. Women were afraid to stay home alone. Stores sold out of new locks and chains for doors. Some women moved out of the city completely. The newspapers gave the killer a name, the Boston Strangler. Police from different cities worked together, but they could not find him. They had no witnesses. They had no physical evidence that linked one person to all the scenes. DeSalvo told his lawyer that he was the man who caused all this fear. He described details of the apartments that had never been released to the public. He knew where the bodies were found. He knew what they were wearing. He knew how they were killed. He said he remembered these things clearly. He confessed to all 13 murders. But even as he confessed, there was a problem. No physical proof, like fingerprints or blood, connected him to any of the murder scenes. Police had his confession, but they did not have evidence to support it in a court of law. They could not charge him with murder based only on his words. So for now, he remained in jail for the other crimes he committed, the ones where women had survived and identified him. Albert DeSalvo remained in jail awaiting trial for the robberies and sexual assaults he had committed in 1964. These were the crimes where women had survived and identified him as the Green Man and the Measuring Man. His lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, had to plan a defense. Bailey decided to argue that his client was not guilty by reason of insanity. To prove DeSalvo was insane, Bailey wanted to bring up the confession to the strangling murders in court. He believed that if the jury heard DeSalvo claim to be the Boston Strangler, they would see him as a madman and send him to a hospital instead of prison. The trial for the sexual assault charges began in 1967. DeSalvo sat in the courtroom. He listened as witnesses described how he had tricked his way into their homes and attacked them. His lawyer tried to tell the jury about the strangling confessions, but the judge made a ruling. He said the confessions could not be used as evidence in this trial. The jury would only hear about the crimes DeSalvo was charged with. They would not hear about the 13 dead women. The jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. In February of 1967, shortly after his trial, DeSalvo was being held at Bridgewater State Hospital. This was a facility for criminals who were considered mentally ill. One night, he escaped with 2 other inmates. They used handmade tools to open a window and climbed down using knotted sheets. A huge search began. Police set up roadblocks. They searched houses and woods. DeSalvo had changed his clothes and was wearing a uniform he found, pretending to be a Navy officer. But the next day, he turned himself in. He left a note on his bed in the prison saying he escaped to draw attention to the poor conditions at the hospital. After this escape, he was moved to a maximum security prison in Walpole, Massachusetts. DeSalvo spent the next 6 years in prison. He gave many interviews to reporters and writers. He talked about the stranglings in detail. Some people who heard him speak believed him completely. Others were not sure. They noticed that some details he told did not match the police reports. For example, he sometimes got the color of a victim's furniture wrong or the time of day wrong. His defenders said he was simply confused after so many years. His doubters said he was lying and making it up as he went. On November 26, 1973, DeSalvo was found dead inside the prison infirmary at Walpole. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. Other inmates were suspected, but no one was ever charged with his murder. The official cause of death was homicide. Some people believed he was killed because he was a known informant or because of debts. Others believed he was killed by someone who wanted to silence him forever. With his death, the case of the Boston Strangler seemed to be closed for good. He was buried, and the files were put away. But the questions did not go away. For decades after his death, many people continued to doubt that DeSalvo was the real killer. His own family believed he was innocent of the murders. The family of Mary Sullivan, the last victim, also believed DeSalvo did not kill her. They pointed to the differences between his confession and the facts. Experts who studied serial killers said the murders were too different from each other to be the work of one man. Some victims were old, some were young. Some were strangled with hands, some with cords. Some were sexually assaulted, some were not. This variety was unusual for one killer. In the year 2000, the families of Mary Sullivan and Albert DeSalvo joined together. They asked the police to re-examine the evidence. They wanted modern science to be used. They requested that both bodies be dug up so DNA testing could be done. After years of legal battles, a judge agreed. In 2013, the bodies of Mary Sullivan and Albert DeSalvo were exhumed. Scientists took samples from both. On July 11, 2013, the Boston Police Department made an announcement. They had used new DNA technology to test evidence from the Mary Sullivan murder scene. They compared it to DNA from DeSalvo's nephew. The Y-DNA, which is passed down from father to son, was a very close match. This meant the man who killed Mary Sullivan was from the same family line as DeSalvo. To confirm this, they tested DeSalvo's own body. On July 19, 2013, the district attorney held a press conference. He announced that the DNA from the crime scene matched the DNA taken from Albert DeSalvo's exhumed body. The seminal fluid found at the scene of Mary Sullivan's murder was his. This evidence did not prove he committed all 13 murders, but it proved he committed the last one. For many people, this was enough to confirm that his confession was true. The official position of the police and the district attorney's office became that Albert DeSalvo was the Boston Strangler. The case that had haunted Boston for 50 years was finally solved by science. Albert DeSalvo was already dead and could not be tried or punished for these crimes. The victims could not be brought back. But for the families of the women who died, the DNA finding gave them an answer. They now knew for certain who was responsible for at least one of the deaths. The story of the Boston Strangler, which had caused so much fear and confusion for so many years, was finally complete. Story 5. Herman Webster Mudgett was born on May 16, 1861, in a small town called Gilmanton, New Hampshire. His parents were Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodate Page Price. Both families had lived in the area for many generations, going back to the first English settlers. Herman was the third child in the family. He had an older brother named Arthur, an older sister named Ellen, and later a younger brother named Henry. Herman's father was a hard-working man who did many different jobs to support the family. He worked as a farmer, a trader, and sometimes as a house painter. The family lived on a farm, and life was not easy. Herman's father drank too much alcohol, and when he drank, he became mean. He would beat his children harshly. This created a difficult and frightening home life for young Herman. Despite the problems at home, Herman was very smart. He did well in school and graduated from Gilmanton Academy with honors when he was 16 years old. Before that, he had also spent some time at Phillips Exeter Academy, which was a well-known school. His classmates did not like that he was so smart. They bullied him and made his school life hard. One event from his school years affected him deeply. Some older boys decided to frighten him. They took him into a room where there was a human skeleton. They forced him to stand in front of it and made him put the skeleton's hands on his face. Herman was terrified at first, but after the initial fear passed, he found that he was not scared anymore. In fact, he became very interested in the skeleton. He wanted to understand death and how the body worked. After that experience, he started catching and killing small animals so he could cut them open and study what was inside. Herman's parents were devout Methodists. They went to church regularly and tried to raise their children with strong religious values. But Herman did not seem to absorb these lessons. He was more interested in science and medicine. When Herman was 17 years old, he got married. On July 4th, 1878, he married a young woman named Clara Lovering in Alton, New Hampshire. Herman was still a teenager, and Clara was about his age. On February 3rd, 1880, they had a son. They named him Robert Lovering Mudgett, but the marriage was not a happy one. People who lived with them later said that Herman was physically violent with Clara. He would hit her and hurt her. In 1879, Herman enrolled at the University of Vermont in Burlington. He stayed there for 1 year, but he did not like it. He wanted something different. In 1882, he transferred to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He joined the Department of Medicine and Surgery. Herman was not the best student. His grades were average, not excellent. But he worked hard in one area. He spent a lot of time in the anatomy lab, where students learned about the human body by dissecting cadavers. The chief anatomy instructor was a professor named William James Herdman. Herman worked closely with him. During this time, Herman became involved in a dark and illegal practice. Medical schools needed dead bodies for students to study. There were not enough bodies that were legally available, so some medical schools paid people to steal fresh graves and bring them bodies. This was called body snatching. Herman and his professor were said to have been involved in this practice. They would find newly buried bodies, dig them up at night, and bring them to the lab. Herman also learned how to use cadavers for another purpose. He discovered that he could take out life insurance policies on fake people, then use a dead body to make it look like that person had died. Then he would collect the insurance money. Before moving to Michigan, Herman had apprenticed with a doctor in New Hampshire named Nahum White. Dr. White was a strong supporter of using human dissection for medical education. This experience gave Herman more exposure to working with dead bodies. In 1884, while Herman was still in medical school, Clara had enough of the violence. She moved back to New Hampshire with their son Robert. After that, she had very little contact with Herman. Herman graduated from the University of Michigan in June 1884. He was now a doctor. After graduation, Herman moved to Moores, a small town in New York. He tried to start a practice there, but soon a rumor started. People said they had seen Herman with a little boy, and then the boy disappeared. Herman told people that the boy had gone back home to Massachusetts. No one investigated further, and no charges were filed. But Herman decided it was best to leave town quickly. He traveled next to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He got a job at a place called Norristown State Hospital, which was a mental hospital. He worked as a keeper, which meant he watched over the patients. But he quit after only a few days. Then he found work at a drugstore in Philadelphia. This did not last long either. While he was working there, a boy became sick and died after taking medicine that was purchased at the store. Herman said he had nothing to do with the death, but he did not stay to answer questions. He left Philadelphia immediately. Herman realized that his real name was becoming known in connection with problems. He decided he needed a new name to avoid trouble. He chose the name Henry Howard Holmes. From that point on, he would be known as H. H. Holmes. In 1886, Holmes moved to Chicago, Illinois. He was 25 years old. Chicago was a big, growing city. It was a good place to start over with a new name. Shortly after arriving, he found a drugstore for sale at the corner of South Wallace Avenue and West 63rd Street in a neighborhood called Englewood. The owner was an elderly woman named Elizabeth Holton. She gave Holmes a job working in the store. He worked hard and was polite and helpful to customers. Mrs. Holton trusted him. Eventually, he bought the drugstore from her. While Holmes was building his new life in Chicago, he was not honest about his personal life. In late 1886, he married a woman named Myrta Belknap. The wedding took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. At this time, Holmes was still legally married to Clara. A few weeks after marrying Myrta, he filed for divorce from Clara. He accused her of being unfaithful. He could not prove this, and Clara probably never even knew about the divorce papers. The case went nowhere and was eventually dismissed in 1891. So Holmes now had two wives who did not know about each other. Holmes and Myrta had a daughter together. She was born on July 4th, 1889, in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago. They named her Lucy Theodate Holmes. Holmes lived with Myrta and Lucy in a nearby suburb called Wilmette. He would travel into Chicago each day to work at the drugstore and handle his other business deals. By 1890, Holmes owned the drugstore and the land it sat on. Across the street from the drugstore, there was an empty lot. Holmes bought this lot as well. He had big plans for this piece of land. He wanted to build something new there. In 1887, Holmes began construction on the empty lot across from his drugstore. He told people he was building a mixed-use building. The first floor would have retail spaces, including a new and larger drugstore for himself. The second floor would have apartments for rent. Holmes hired architects and a steel company to help with the construction, but he had no intention of paying them fully. When the work was done, Holmes refused to pay what he owed. The architects and the steel company took him to court in 1888. This pattern of building and not paying would continue. In 1892, Holmes decided to add a third floor to the building. He told investors and suppliers that he wanted to open a hotel on the top floor. The timing was perfect. In 1893, Chicago would host the world's Columbian Exposition, also called the Chicago World's Fair. Millions of visitors would come to the city. Holmes said he needed the hotel to house tourists during the fair. Investors gave him money. Suppliers gave him materials. Again, Holmes did not pay many of them. The building at 63rd and Wallace became known later as Holmes's Castle. But during the time it was being built, it was just a strange building. Holmes was constantly changing the plans. He hired different workers for different parts, so no single person knew the full layout. He would fire workers before they finished, then hire new ones. This meant that only Holmes himself knew where all the rooms were and how they connected. The third floor, where the hotel was supposed to be, was not a normal hotel. It had rooms that did not make sense. Some doors opened onto brick walls. Some staircases led nowhere. Some rooms had no windows. There were hidden passages and secret rooms. Holmes later claimed these were for hiding furniture he had bought on credit and did not plan to pay for. If creditors came looking for their goods, he could hide them in these secret spaces. In the basement, Holmes installed a large vault. He also had a workshop with tools. There was a kiln or furnace that could get very hot. He told people these were for his business projects. While the building was going up, Holmes continued to run his drugstore. He hired people to work for him. Among them were young women who worked as clerks and stenographers. Holmes was a handsome and charming man. He could be very likable when he wanted to be. Several of the women who worked for him became romantically involved with him. One of these women was Julia Smythe. Julia was married to a man named Dr. Lawrence Connor. The Connors moved into the building, and Lawrence Connor began working at the jewelry counter in Holmes's drugstore. Julia and Holmes began an affair. When Lawrence Connor found out, he was angry. He quit his job and moved away. But he left Julia behind. Julia had a 5-year-old daughter named Pearl. She stayed in the building with Pearl and continued her relationship with Holmes. On Christmas Eve in 1891, Julia and Pearl disappeared. Holmes told people that Julia had left suddenly to visit her dying sister. Later, he changed his story. He said Julia had fled because she was afraid of her former husband. But the truth was different. Years later, Holmes admitted that Julia had become pregnant. He tried to perform an abortion on her. In those days, abortions were dangerous and many women died from them. Julia died from the procedure. Then Holmes killed little Pearl. He likely did this so the girl could not tell anyone what had happened to her mother. Pearl was only 5 years old. In May 1892, a young woman named Emmeline Sigrand came to work for Holmes. She was 23 years old. She worked as his secretary. Emmeline was pretty and intelligent. Holmes pursued her romantically. For a time, they were close. But after 6 months, Emmeline seemed to lose interest in Holmes. She was last seen in December 1892. Holmes told her parents that she had left to marry a man named Robert Phelps. But no such marriage ever took place. Emmeline was never seen again. Later, police found a skeleton that they believed was hers. It was discovered at the home of a Chicago doctor who admitted that he had prepared skeletons for Holmes. In early 1893, a young woman named Wilhelmina Williams moved to Chicago. Everyone called her Minnie. She was 24 years old and had been an actress for a short time. Holmes hired her as his personal stenographer. Minnie did not know that Holmes had met her before, several years earlier in Boston, when he was using a different fake name. Holmes convinced Minnie to sign over the deed to some property she owned in Fort Worth, Texas. She transferred it to a man named Alexander Bond, which was one of Holmes's aliases. Holmes then signed the property over to another man named Benjamin Pitzel, who was his friend and partner in crime. Holmes and Minnie began living together as husband and wife. They rented an apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. In July 1893, Minnie's younger sister came to visit. Her name was Anna Williams, but everyone called her Nanny. She was 18 years old. Nanny wrote a letter to her aunt on July 5, 1893. In the letter, she said that Brother Harry, Holmes, would take care of her now. She said she and her sister would go to Europe with him. After that letter, neither Minnie nor Nanny was ever seen alive again. Holmes later used Minnie's name in his scams to make it look like she was still alive. During the time of the World's Fair in 1893, which ran from May to October, many people came through Chicago. Some of them visited Holmes's building. Some of them disappeared. A man named John Davis came from Pennsylvania to see the fair. He vanished and was never found. A man named Harry Walker came from Indiana in November 1893. He had taken out a life insurance policy for $20,000 and told friends he was working for Holmes in Chicago. He disappeared too. Holmes did not only kill women. He also killed men who got in his way or knew too much about his scams. One man named Robert Latimer worked as a janitor in the building. He knew about Holmes's insurance fraud schemes. Holmes killed him to keep him quiet. By 1894, Holmes had left Chicago. Insurance companies were starting to suspect him of arson. He had burned some of his own properties to collect insurance money. He went to Fort Worth, Texas, where he still had the property from the Williams sisters. He tried to build another building there, again without paying his workers or suppliers. In July 1894, Holmes was arrested in St. Louis, Missouri. The charge was selling goods that he had already used as collateral for loans. This was a type of fraud. He was put in jail. While in jail, he met a convicted outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth. Hedgepeth was serving a 25-year sentence. Holmes told Hedgepeth about a plan he had. He wanted to take out a life insurance policy on himself, then fake his own death and collect the money. He needed a lawyer he could trust. Hedgepeth gave him the name of a young St. Louis attorney named Jephthah Howe. Holmes promised to pay Hedgepeth $500 for the referral. Holmes was released on bail. He met with Jephthah Howe. But Howe did not just help Holmes. He saw that the scheme was a way to make money for himself too. The plan was set in motion. But the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Holmes did not push the claim. Instead, he came up with a new plan using his friend Benjamin Pittezel. Benjamin Pittezel was a carpenter with a criminal past. He and Holmes had become close friends. Pittezel was willing to help Holmes with his schemes. The new plan was simple. Pittezel would fake his own death. His wife would collect a $10,000 life insurance policy. Then they would split the money between Holmes, Pittezel, and Howe. The fake death was supposed to happen in Philadelphia. Pittezel would pretend to be an inventor named B.F. Perry. There would be a lab explosion. A dead body would be found, and everyone would think it was Pittezel. Holmes said he would find a cadaver to use for the body. On September 4th, 1894, Holmes and Pittezel were in Philadelphia. They rented a house. Holmes brought chloroform, which is a drug that can make people unconscious. He also brought benzene, which is a liquid that burns easily. Holmes gave Pittezel the chloroform. But he did not just make him unconscious. He gave him too much. Pittezel died from the chloroform. Then Holmes set the body on fire with benzene to make it look like an accident. He had not found a cadaver to use. He had used the real Pittezel. Holmes collected the insurance money. Pittezel's wife, Carrie, believed that her husband had died in a terrible accident. She did not know that Holmes had killed him. But Holmes was not finished with the Pittezel family. He told Carrie that her husband had left behind a secret. He said that Benjamin Pittezel was not really dead. He said the body in Philadelphia was someone else, and that Benjamin was hiding in London, England, because he was in trouble with the law. Carrie believed him. Holmes said that Benjamin needed some of his children to come join him in hiding. This would make it look like a normal family moving around. Carrie agreed to let 3 of her 5 children go with Holmes. The children were 13-year-old Alice, 9-year-old Nellie, and 7-year-old Howard. They were called the Pittezel children. Holmes took the 3 children on a long journey. They traveled through the northeastern United States and into Canada. At the same time, Holmes was also traveling with Carrie Pittezel, but on a different route. He kept them separate. He told Carrie that her children were with their father. He told the children that their mother would meet them soon. All of this was a lie. In Detroit, Michigan, Holmes and the children were just a few blocks away from where Carrie was staying. She did not know they were so close. Holmes was also traveling with his current wife, Georgiana Yoke, whom he had married in January 1894. Georgiana had no idea what Holmes was doing. Holmes took the children to Toronto, Canada. On October 25, 1894, he rented a house on St. Vincent Street. He told Alice and Nellie to get into a large trunk. It was a game, he said. Once they were inside, he closed the lid. He had drilled a small hole in the top of the trunk. He put one end of a rubber hose through the hole. He attached the other end to a gas line in the house. Then he turned on the gas. The 2 girls suffocated inside the trunk. Holmes took their bodies out and buried them in the basement of the house. He buried them naked so that if they were found, it would be harder to identify them. Then Holmes went to Indianapolis, Indiana. He rented another house in a neighborhood called Irvington. He had Howard with him. On October 10, 1894, Holmes went to a local pharmacy and bought drugs. He used these drugs to kill the 7-year-old boy. Then he cut up the body with knives he had sharpened at a repair shop. He burned most of the body in the fireplace. But some parts did not burn completely. He hid the remaining pieces, including some teeth and bones, in the chimney of the house. Holmes had now killed Benjamin Pittezel and 3 of his children. He had also killed at least 4 women and several other people in Chicago. He continued to move around, always lying, always running from his past. By November 1894, people were starting to ask questions. Benjamin Pitzel's body had been found in Philadelphia. The insurance company had paid the claim, but something felt wrong. Carrie Pitzel was worried about her children. She had not heard from them in weeks. Holmes was telling her different stories, and nothing made sense anymore. Holmes knew that he could not stay in one place for long. He went to Boston, Massachusetts. He thought he could escape to another country, but people were looking for him. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency, which was a private detective agency, had been hired to track him down. They found him in Boston on November 17, 1894. He was arrested. The official charge at that moment was horse theft in Texas. But the authorities had bigger suspicions. They held him while they began to investigate what had really happened to Benjamin Pitzel and his 3 missing children. When Holmes was arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, the police did not yet know the full extent of his crimes. The official charge was horse theft in Texas. But the authorities in Philadelphia were very interested in Benjamin Pitzel's death. They had questions about how he died and what had happened to his 3 missing children. The Philadelphia Police Department assigned a detective named Frank Geyer to investigate the case. Detective Geyer was a careful and determined man. He began his work in June 1894, even before Holmes was arrested. His job was to find Alice, Nellie, and Howard Pitzel. He started by tracing Holmes's movements after Benjamin Pitzel's death. He talked to people who had seen Holmes and the children. He followed the trail from city to city. Geyer went to Detroit, Michigan. He learned that Holmes had been there with 3 children who matched the descriptions of Alice, Nellie, and Howard. From there, the trail led to Canada. Geyer crossed the border and continued his search. In Toronto, he found the house on St. Vincent Street where Holmes had rented rooms. The landlord let Geyer look around. In the basement, Geyer noticed that the dirt floor looked like it had been disturbed recently. He started digging. The deeper Geyer dug, the stronger the smell became. It was a horrible smell, the smell of death. At about 3 feet down, he found something. It was a bone, a human bone. He kept digging. Soon he found more bones. He had found the bodies of Alice and Nellie Pitzel. They had been buried in the basement, naked, their bodies already decomposing. Geyer also found letters in the house that the children had written but never sent. These letters helped him understand more about their journey with Holmes. News of this discovery spread quickly. The newspapers wrote sensational stories about Holmes and his crimes. Now the police in Chicago became very interested in Holmes's building on 63rd Street. In July 1895, Chicago police and reporters began a thorough search of the building that people now called the Castle. They searched every room. They looked in the basement. They dug up the floors. But they did not find what they expected. There were no piles of bones. There was no crematorium. There were no torture chambers. The sensational stories in the newspapers had been greatly exaggerated. However, the police did find some troubling items. They found a piece of human bone that might have belonged to Julia Connor. They found the remains of a small child, possibly Pearl Connor. They found a burned gold watch chain and burned dress buttons that likely belonged to Minnie Williams. They found a tuft of human hair stuck in a chimney. These items suggested that people had died in the building, but there was not enough evidence to prove murder in Chicago. Detective Geyer continued his investigation. From Toronto, he went to Indianapolis. He found the house in the Irvington neighborhood where Holmes had stayed with Howard Pitzel. Geyer searched the house carefully. In the fireplace and chimney, he found small pieces of bone and teeth. They were the remains of 7-year-old Howard Pitzel. Holmes had burned most of the boy's body, but some parts had survived. The evidence was clear. Holmes had murdered this child. With the discovery of the 3 children's bodies, the case against Holmes became much stronger. He could no longer claim that he was just a con artist and swindler. He was clearly a murderer. In October 1895, Holmes was put on trial in Philadelphia. The charge was the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. This was the strongest case because there was a clear body and clear evidence of how he died. The trial lasted for several weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. They told the court about Holmes's lies, his schemes, and his movements. Carrie Pitezel testified about how Holmes had tricked her into giving up her children. Detective Geyer testified about finding the bodies in Toronto and Indianapolis. Medical experts testified about how Benjamin Pitezel had died. Holmes tried to defend himself. He claimed that he was innocent. He said that Benjamin Pitezel had died accidentally. He admitted to being a fraudster and a swindler, but he denied being a murderer. The jury did not believe him. They found him guilty of murder. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. While waiting for his execution in Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia, Holmes began to talk. He saw an opportunity to make money. The Hearst newspapers, which were owned by William Randolph Hearst, offered to pay him for his confession. They paid him $7,500, which was a large amount of money in those days. In exchange, Holmes told his story. Holmes confessed to killing 27 people. He named his victims. He described how he had killed Julia Smythe and her daughter Pearl. He described killing Emmeline Sigrand. He described killing Minnie and Nanny Williams. He described killing the Pitezel children. He also described killing several other people whose names he gave to the newspapers. However, Holmes was a known liar. Some of the people he claimed to have killed were later found to be alive. Some of his stories could not be proven. Of the 27 murders he confessed to, only 8 or 9 are considered confirmed by historians. But there is no doubt that he killed at least 9 people, and likely more. In his confession, Holmes also told strange stories. He said that he had been possessed by the devil. He said that his crimes were not his fault. He changed his story several times. He would say one thing one day and something different the next. The police and the newspapers did not know what to believe. But one thing was certain. He had killed Benjamin Pitezel and his 3 children. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was taken to the gallows at Moyamensing Prison. He was calm on the morning of his execution. He ate a good breakfast. He spoke with the guards and with officials. He showed no fear. Just before he was hanged, he made a short speech. He said very little about his crimes. He remained calm and amiable until the very end. The execution did not go smoothly. When the trap door opened, Holmes dropped, but his neck did not break. Instead of dying instantly, he strangled slowly. He twitched and struggled for more than 15 minutes. Finally, the doctors pronounced him dead. He was 34 years old. Before his execution, Holmes had made a strange request. He asked that his body be placed in a coffin filled with concrete and buried 10 feet deep. He said he was afraid that body snatchers would steal his corpse and sell it to medical schools for dissection. His request was granted. His body was buried in an unmarked grave at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeadon, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. After Holmes's death, the stories about him continued to grow. The Murder Castle in Chicago became a tourist attraction of sorts. In August 1895, while Holmes was in prison, the building caught fire. 2 men were seen entering the building around 9 p.m. About half an hour later, they ran out quickly. Then there were explosions, and the building went up in flames. Investigators later found a half-empty gas can under the back steps. The fire damaged the building, but it did not destroy it completely. The building was repaired and used for other purposes. It remained standing until 1938, when it was torn down. Today, the site is occupied by a post office. Marion Hedgepeth, the outlaw who had given Holmes the name of the lawyer Jephthah Howe, was later pardoned and released from prison. He returned to a life of crime. On New Year's Eve in 1909, he tried to rob a bar in Chicago. A police officer named Edward Jaburek shot and killed him during the holdup. Patrick Quinlan was the caretaker of Holmes's building in Chicago. He had worked for Holmes and knew many of his secrets. On March 7, 1914, Quinlan committed suicide by taking poison. His body was found in his bedroom with a note that said, "I couldn't sleep." His relatives said he had been haunted by nightmares and hallucinations for months before his death. Carrie Pitzel, whose husband and 3 children were killed by Holmes, had to live with this terrible loss for the rest of her life. She had 2 remaining children who had not gone with Holmes. She tried to rebuild her life, but it was very hard. The fame of the case followed her wherever she went. Holmes's son from his first marriage, Robert Lovering Mudgett, grew up and became a certified public accountant. He later served as city manager of Orlando, Florida. His daughter Lucy, from his marriage to Myrta, became a public school teacher. Both of them tried to live normal lives away from their father's terrible reputation. For many years, there were rumors that Holmes had escaped execution. Some people claimed that the man hanged in Philadelphia was not really Holmes. In 2017, more than 120 years after his death, scientists exhumed Holmes's body to test these claims. They opened the grave at Holy Cross Cemetery. Because his coffin had been filled with concrete, his body had not decomposed normally. His clothes were almost perfectly preserved. His mustache was still intact. Scientists examined his teeth and compared them to dental records. They confirmed that the body was indeed H. Holmes. He was reburied in the same grave, where he remains to this day. The story of H. Holmes shows how one lie led to another, how small crimes grew into larger ones, and how a man who seemed charming and friendly could hide a heart capable of terrible violence. His actions destroyed many lives and left a trail of grief that lasted for generations. Story 6. Henry McCarty was born in New York City in the year 1859. Historians are not sure of the exact date, but it was either on September 17th or November 23rd. His parents were Irish Catholic immigrants. His father's name was Patrick McCarty, and his mother's name was Catherine. Henry had a younger brother named Joseph, who was born in 1863. When Henry was still a young boy, his father died. This was the first difficult event in his life. After becoming a widow, Catherine McCarty decided to move her family west. They left New York and settled in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was there that Catherine met a man named William Henry Harrison Antrim. Catherine and William Antrim began a relationship, and the family eventually moved with him to Wichita, Kansas in 1870. The family did not stay in Kansas for long. A few years later, they moved again, this time to the New Mexico Territory. On March 1, 1873, Catherine McCarty married William Antrim at a church in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Henry and his brother Joseph were at the wedding and served as witnesses to their mother's marriage. After the wedding, the family moved to a small town called Silver City. It was around this time that Henry's brother Joseph began using the last name Antrim, but Henry did not. Life in Silver City was hard for the family, and soon it became much harder. Catherine became very sick with a disease called tuberculosis. While she was ill, William Antrim left the family. He abandoned Catherine and the 2 boys. Shortly after this, on September 16, 1874, Catherine died from her illness. Henry was only 14 years old. He and his brother were now orphans. With no parents to care for him, Henry had to find a way to survive. A woman named Sarah Brown, who owned a boarding house, let Henry live there. In exchange for his room and food, Henry did chores and worked for her. This arrangement lasted for a while, but soon Henry got into trouble. On September 16, 1875, which was exactly 1 year after his mother died, Henry was caught stealing food. This was his first known arrest. He was 15 years old. Being arrested did not stop him. Only 10 days later, Henry and another boy named George Schaefer robbed a Chinese laundry in Silver City. They stole some clothes and 2 pistols. Henry was caught and put in jail for this theft. He was in jail for only 2 days. On the second night, he escaped by climbing up the chimney. He was now a fugitive. A local newspaper, the Silver City Herald, wrote a story about his escape the next day. This was the first time his name appeared in a newspaper. After escaping, Henry went to find his stepfather, William Antrim. Antrim let him stay for a short time, but then he threw Henry out. Before he left for good, Henry stole some clothes and guns from his stepfather. This was the last time the two ever saw each other. With nowhere else to go, Henry left Silver City and traveled to the Arizona Territory. He was about 16 years old. He found work as a ranch hand, doing manual labor. In his free time, he would go to gambling houses and play cards. In 1876, he got a job working for a well-known rancher named Henry Hooker. During this time in Arizona, he met a man named John R. Mackey. Mackey was a criminal who stole horses from the soldiers at a nearby army camp. Henry began to steal horses with him. Because of his young age and small size, people in the area started calling him Kid Antrim. In 1877, Henry began using a new name for himself. He started telling people his name was William H. Bonney. He did not use his real name, McCarty, anymore. For many years, people would not know his true birth name. On August 17, 1877, William Bonney was in a saloon in a small village called Bonita. He got into an argument with a blacksmith named Francis Windy Cahill. Cahill had been mean to Bonney before and had called him a bad name. During the argument, the two men began to fight on the floor. They struggled over a gun that Bonney was carrying. During the struggle, the gun went off. Bonney shot Cahill. Cahill was hit in the body and died the next day. A man who saw the fight said that Bonney had no choice but to use his gun. Bonney knew he was in serious trouble. He ran away from the village, but came back a few days later. He was caught by a local lawman and put in the guardhouse at a nearby military post called Camp Grant. Before officers could come to take him to a real jail, Bonney escaped again. After this second escape, Bonney stole a horse and rode back to the New Mexico Territory to get away from Arizona. While he was traveling, a group of Apache Indians took the horse from him. He was left in the middle of nowhere and had to walk for many miles until he found a settlement. He arrived at a place called Fort Stanton. He was starving and very weak. He went to the home of a man he knew named John Jones. John's mother, Barbara Jones, took care of him and nursed him back to health. Once he was strong again, Bonney went to a place called Apache Teju. There, he joined a group of men who stole cattle. They stole their cattle from a wealthy rancher named John Chisholm. This was his first time being part of an organized gang. He was now living as an outlaw in Lincoln County, New Mexico. In early 1878, William Bonney was living in Lincoln County, New Mexico. He was not yet a famous outlaw. He found work as a cowboy for a British rancher and businessman named John Henry Tunstall. Tunstall was a good boss. He treated his employees with respect, and Bonney felt loyal to him. Tunstall was in the middle of a conflict with other powerful businessmen in the county, named Lawrence Murphy, James Dolan, and John Riley. These men controlled most of the money and power in the area. Tunstall and his lawyer, Alexander McSween, were their main rivals. This conflict was about to turn violent. On February 18, 1878, a posse of men working for Tunstall's rivals rode onto his land. They were led by the Lincoln County Sheriff, William Brady, who was on the side of Murphy and Dolan. The posse intended to steal Tunstall's cattle and property. Tunstall heard they were on his land and rode out to stop them. When he met the posse, one of the men shot Tunstall in the chest, knocking him off his horse. Another man then took Tunstall's own gun and shot him in the back of the head, killing him. The murder of John Tunstall was the spark that started the Lincoln County War. Bonney was enraged by the killing of his boss. He joined a group of men who called themselves the Regulators. This group was formed to seek justice for Tunstall's murder. They were authorized by a local justice of the peace to arrest the killers. A man named Dick Brewer was the leader of the Regulators, and Bonney became one of his most active members. The Regulators' first major action was to go after two of the men believed to have killed Tunstall, Frank Baker and William Morton. On March 9, 1878, the Regulators captured the two men. They said they were taking them to jail. While traveling with their prisoners, the Regulators shot and killed both Baker and Morton. The Regulators claimed the men were trying to escape. This was the first time Bonney and the Regulators killed men outside of a gun battle. The next crime happened on April 1, 1878. The Regulators, including Bonney, hid behind a fence near the main street in the town of Lincoln. They were waiting for Sheriff William Brady, who they blamed for Tunstall's death. When Sheriff Brady and his deputies walked down the street, the Regulators opened fire from their hiding spot. The shooting was fast and violent. Sheriff Brady was hit many times and died instantly. One of his deputies, George Heineman, was also killed. During the shooting, Bonney was hit in the thigh by a bullet. He was wounded but managed to escape with the other Regulators. A few days later, on April 4th, another member of the Regulators, Dick Brewer, was killed in a shootout at a place called Blazer's Mill. After this, warrants were issued for the arrest of many Regulators, including Bonney. He was now officially charged with the murders of Sheriff Brady and Deputy Heineman. The violence did not stop. The conflict between the two factions grew into a full-scale battle. In July 1878, Bonney and about 50 other Regulators went to Lincoln and took control of several buildings. The Murphy-Dolan faction, with the help of a new sheriff and soldiers from nearby Fort Stanton, attacked them. This became known as the Battle of Lincoln. For 5 days, the two sides shot at each other. On July 19th, the men defending the house of Alexander McSween, where Bonney was, ran out of luck. The attackers set the house on fire. As the fire spread, Bonney and the others inside were forced to make a run for it. In the chaos, Alexander McSween was shot and killed. Bonney shot and killed one of the men who killed McSween, a man named Robert Beckwith. Bonney escaped the burning house and fled from Lincoln. After the Battle of Lincoln, Bonney was an outlaw with a price on his head. In August 1878, he and 3 other survivors of the battle were near a Native American reservation. A man named Morris Bernstein, who worked for the agency, was killed. Although the evidence was not clear, a grand jury indicted Bonney for this murder as well. For a time, Bonney tried to make a deal with the new territorial governor, Lew Wallace. He offered to testify about other crimes in exchange for a pardon. Governor Wallace met with Bonney in secret and promised him protection if he would testify. Bonney agreed, and even let himself be arrested as part of the plan. He testified before a grand jury. But after he testified, the district attorney refused to let him go. Bonney believed Governor Wallace had tricked him. On June 17, 1879, he escaped from the Lincoln County Jail again. For the next year, Bonney continued to break the law. On January 10, 1880, he was in a saloon in Fort Sumner. A man named Joe Grant, who was new to the area, was bragging that he was going to kill Bonney. Bonney walked up to Grant and asked to see his fancy revolver. Grant handed it over. Bonney saw that the gun had only 3 bullets in it. While pretending to admire it, he quietly turned the cylinder so that the next time the hammer fell, it would land on an empty chamber. He handed the gun back. Grant then pointed the gun at Bonney's face and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked on the empty chamber. Before Grant could react, Bonney drew his own pistol and shot Grant in the head, killing him instantly. In the winter of 1880, Bonney was riding with a new group of outlaws, including Dave Rudabaugh and Tom O'Folliard. On November 29th, a posse chased them to a ranch. Bonnie and his friends took the owner of the ranch, a man named Greathouse, hostage. The leader of the posse, a deputy named James Carlyle, offered to take Greathouse's place. Bonnie agreed. While Carlyle was inside, he tried to escape by jumping through a window. As he jumped, the outlaws shot and killed him. The rest of the posse then retreated. A few weeks later, on December 23rd, Bonnie and his gang were cornered in a stone hut at a place called Stinking Springs by a posse led by a new sheriff, Pat Garrett. A gunfight broke out. One of Bonnie's friends, Charlie Baudry, was killed when he walked outside. Surrounded and with no way out, Bonnie and the others surrendered. The crime spree of William Bonney, the man now famous as Billy the Kid, was over for the moment. He was taken to jail to stand trial for the murder of Sheriff Brady. After his capture at Stinking Springs in December 1880, William Bonney, now widely known as Billy the Kid, was taken to the city of Las Vegas, New Mexico. When the train carrying him and the other prisoners arrived on December 26th, a large crowd of curious people had gathered to see the famous outlaw. The next day, a group of armed men tried to take one of the prisoners, Dave Rudabaugh, but Sheriff Pat Garrett refused to let them. He safely delivered all the prisoners to the jail in Santa Fe. While in the Santa Fe jail, Bonnie wrote 4 letters to Governor Lew Wallace over the next 3 months. He reminded the governor of his promise of clemency and asked to be set free. Governor Wallace did not answer his letters and refused to help him. Bonnie would have to face trial. In April 1881, Bonnie was taken to the town of Mesilla, New Mexico, for his trial. He was tried for the murder of Sheriff William Brady, which had happened 3 years earlier in 1878. The trial lasted 2 days. Witnesses testified about the shooting on the street in Lincoln. On April 13th, the jury found Bonnie guilty of murder. He was the only person from the Lincoln County War to be convicted of a crime. The judge, Warren Bristol, sentenced him to death. He was to be hanged by the neck until he was dead. The execution was scheduled for May 13th, 1881. After the sentencing, Bonnie was moved back to Lincoln to wait for his execution. He was held in a room on the top floor of the town courthouse, which was also the building where the sheriff's office was located. Sheriff Pat Garrett was in charge of him. 2 deputies guarded him, James Bell and Bob Ollinger. Ollinger was known to be mean to Bonnie and often threatened him. On the evening of April 28, 1881, Sheriff Garrett was out of town collecting taxes. Deputy Ollinger took 5 other prisoners across the street to a hotel for their dinner. This left only Deputy James Bell alone with Bonnie in the courthouse. Bonnie asked Bell if he could go to the outhouse, which was a small building behind the courthouse. Bell agreed and walked him outside. On their way back up the stairs to the cell, Bonnie was walking in front of Bell. When he reached the top of the stairs, he turned a corner where Bell could not see him. He had slipped one of his hands out of his handcuffs. As Bell came around the corner, Bonnie hit him on the head with the loose handcuffs. They struggled, and Bonnie was able to grab Bell's gun. Bell ran back down the stairs to get away. Bonnie shot him in the back. Bell fell and died a short time later. Bonnie now had a gun, but his legs were still chained. He broke into Sheriff Garrett's office and found a shotgun that belonged to Deputy Ollinger. He carried the shotgun to a window at the front of the courthouse and waited. Ollinger heard the shot that killed Bell and ran back from the hotel across the street. When he got to the courthouse yard, he looked up. Bonnie called out to him, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get." When Ollinger looked up, Bonnie fired the shotgun and killed him instantly. Bonnie then found an axe in the building. He used it to break the chains off his legs. This took about an hour. He then went outside, found a horse, and rode out of Lincoln. Some people said they heard him singing as he left town. Bonnie was a fugitive again. Governor Wallace put a new reward of $500 on his head for his capture, dead or alive. For almost 3 months, Bonnie managed to stay hidden. Sheriff Pat Garrett heard rumors that Bonnie was in the area of Fort Sumner, visiting his friends. On July 14, 1881, Garrett rode to Fort Sumner with 2 deputies to investigate. That night, Garrett went to the bedroom of a man named Pete Maxwell. Maxwell was a friend of Bonnie's and the son of a wealthy local family. Garrett wanted to ask Maxwell if he knew where Bonnie was. Garrett and Maxwell sat in Maxwell's dark bedroom and talked for several hours. Around midnight, a man suddenly appeared in the open doorway of the bedroom. It was Billy the Kid. He had not expected Garrett to be there. The room was very dark, and Bonnie could not see clearly who was inside. He walked toward the bed where Maxwell and Garrett were sitting. He drew his pistol and backed up slightly. He spoke in Spanish, asking, "Quién es? Quién es?" which means, "Who is it? Who is it?" Sheriff Garrett recognized Bonnie's voice. He quickly drew his own revolver and fired 2 shots. The first bullet hit Bonnie in the chest, just above his heart. The second bullet missed. Bonnie fell to the floor and died almost instantly. A few hours after the shooting, a local justice of the peace gathered 6 men to act as a coroner's jury. They looked at Bonnie's body and questioned Garrett and Maxwell. They officially decided that the body was that of William H. Bonnie, also known as Billy the Kid. Bonnie was given a wake that night, with his body watched over by candlelight. He was buried the next day in the old military cemetery at Fort Sumner. A simple wooden marker was placed on his grave. After Bonnie was killed, Sheriff Garrett went to Santa Fe to collect the $500 reward. The acting governor refused to pay it at first. However, many citizens in New Mexico raised money for Garrett, and he received over $7,000 from different communities. A year later, the New Mexico Territorial Legislature passed a special law that finally gave Garrett the $500 reward from the governor. Some people believed that Sheriff Garrett had unfairly ambushed Bonnie. To tell his side of the story, Garrett worked with a writer to publish a book in 1882 called The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Over the years, many stories spread that Bonnie had not really been killed. Several men came forward claiming to be Billy the Kid. The most famous was a man from Texas named Ollie Brushy Bill Roberts, who made his claim in 1948. He asked the governor of New Mexico for a pardon, but the governor did not believe him. Most historians agree that these claims were false, and that the man Sheriff Garrett shot in Pete Maxwell's bedroom was truly Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was only 21 years old when he died, but his short life of crime made him one of the most famous outlaws in American history.